Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Centric. This being a show I talk about TV shows that are crime dramas. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Reacher Season 1, Episode 4. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, we're immediately picking up in the aftermath of last episode. I was curious how Reacher was going to handle this situation. It's like, these were some bad guys you killed, but you still killed some people. So I'm like, how are you going to handle this situation? I was kind of like, are you going to dispose of this whole situation, especially with Spivey's body in there? He stuffs the other two guys' body in there, even to the point he's breaking the last dude's leg just to make him fit. I was like, Jesus. So he ends up getting called up by Finley, so he shows up, and later on Roscoe shows up too. They find what appears to be the vehicle that Joe might have had, but still the one that he rented, and someone destroyed it. So I was like, cool. So got to still continue to keep up appearances. Oh, also we also got to get rid of all those bodies, and obviously Reacher trying to make it seem like it's self-defense, which it was. Those guys were straight up going to kill him, but yeah, he kind of shot them from behind. I mean, they had guns loaded and ready, so he's like, yeah, I set them in a trap and I killed them before they could kill me. So it's not, once again, not like they were good guys. They did kill Spivey, so it's not like, oh, we killed some good guys. It's like, no, they were bad guys, and they would have killed him if given the opportunity. So no tears should be lost, but it's still that kind of, you can tell, at least for Roscoe, it's still kind of that, ugh. I mean, Finley points out, it's like, cool, we've got 7 bodies now in town because ever since you stepped foot. He's like, well, 8, because Hubble's definitely dead. It's like, well, I don't know if he actually is at this point in time, because we haven't seen a body yet. These people haven't been too discreet about leaving bodies somewhere. So the fact is Hubble's not been found makes me think there's a good chance he might still survive the season. Well, we'll see. But nevertheless, it's like Roscoe was not a fan of this whole situation, because I'm sure it morally makes her feel weird, because yes, she's a cop and these are some bad people and Reacher did what he needed to do, but still seeing the situation of, yeah, you shot them from behind and you lied to Finley. It's like, who am I, working with? And she confronts him about what she learned from KJ last episode. It's like, right, the Baghdad situation. Turns out he killed some very bad people. They were abusing children. Some children that it's in a place he was like 40 miles away from, it was a village like 40 miles north or something like that. But these kids would play in like this destroyed place, just, hang out and play. And ultimately Reacher found out that because he stopped by, because he wanted to make sure, hey, I want to make sure they get back to the village okay, no problems. And he found out some adults were abusing him, so he kind of put them in their place. Hey, you either leave the kids alone or you deal with me. He knew they'd come after him, so he set a trap and he killed them. So wasn't like some good people he killed. And so that's why I'm wondering, because KJ wants to do all this stuff to kind of assassinate Reacher's character, but I'm curious. I mean, who knows how much of that has been redacted? They probably have enough connections for them to be able to find out that information. It's probably enough for them to find out the circumstances behind it as well. Probably kept it super vague just to get Roscoe a little distrusting of Reacher, but it made them kind of become closer, because she's like, right, I might not always agree with the way you approach things, but at the end of the day, finding out, okay, that's your reasoning for pulling the trigger on that situation. He's like, right, so what about you? I need to know, are you okay with me going after people who abuse children? Because he's like, I want to make sure who I'm working alongside of. And it's like, cool, so let's go dump these bodies at, I think it was an airport. They ended up dumping the bodies, messed up the security camera. The security guard had to go deal with that, and they left the bodies. I think it is that thing too of there's just a lot of death and destruction that's kind of followed Reacher to some extent, and you're a small town cop and you just don't want to have to deal with all of this. But I think it, like I said, I believe it's kind of pushing that where you morally kind of draw the line in some capacity. So it's got to make you feel a certain way as a cop. But they go to a hotel, but they still have their back and forth. It's not like she's completely disgusted with him. I think a lot of that she kind of puts to the side, because in her instincts she believes him to be a good guy, and she knows that. And especially when Molly Beth, which I last episode I called her Mary Beth, it's Molly Beth. Her and Reacher talked a little this episode about Joe, because Joe had talked a lot about Reacher, about who he was, that he was smart, but he was also a pain in the ass. And, she's been working with Joe for 2 years. she had joined like 2 years ago, but he would already kind of in a position that he's currently in right now, was in, and everyone respected him because he was very good at what he did. He was just that honorable type of dude, which obviously for Jack, it's like, that's no surprise. I know my brother. I know what kind of character he has. But also, he did say something really sweet where Jack was like, I'm glad my brother had you, because my brother's not the type to open up to someone, which I'm sure they're both kind of in that similar regard. I think that's supposed to be the parallel, him and Roscoe getting closer together, just like Joe and Mary did it again, Molly Beth did. And it's like, right, I'm glad to know my brother had someone by his side who obviously cared as much about him as he cared about them. So it's kind of, at least for him, I think there's some solace in knowing his brother had someone in his life. I think that's kind of a nice thing. But even Roscoe comments on, yeah, you ended up consoling her. It's your brother that died, yet you spent the time to try and console her to make her feel better. So it's like, yeah, that speaks volumes about who you are as a character. And the two of them hook up. I knew it was going to happen eventually. Wasn't expecting it to happen in that particular instance. So I was like, oh, that caught me by surprise. Because it felt like they were having a moment, and then he was like, I'm going to go take a shower. So I was like, okay, so we cut that tension, so I guess we're not. Oh, nope, she followed him in the shower. So, okay. But it's immediately like, right, we got a job to do. Last night changes nothing. It's like, it does in many different capacities. So they eventually went to the truck driver who died. They went to go to his address, but they ended up seeing his mom and dad. And Reacher ends up being like, no, you're not happy to your son. We just want some question him about something, yada, 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 not admitting that he's dead. Which is sad because they talked to his wife about it, Judy. Eventually, word's going to get back to his parents. But I think he's like, right, things would have gotten emotional. I didn't want to like end up wasting time. But Roscoe's like, no, you've already had to deliver enough bad news both to Charlie, about Hubble and also Molly Beth about your brother, so you just didn't want any more. Because he keeps up the stoicness, but it does wear on you when you have to deliver more and more bad news and seeing, because he hasn't really had time to really grieve his brother, because all he's been dead set on is justice and revenge. More revenge than justice, but for some people, in particular Reach's case, it's like they're both one and the same. That's not always the case for a lot of people, but they end up seeing Judy. Judy kind of was already kind of like, yeah, my asshole husband. I think she cared for him to some extent, but he was also kind of a dirtbag. And like, yeah, you're going to get mixed up in some shady shit. Eventually, it's going to get you killed. So I love that she even said, like, yeah, sometimes it just surprises you how much bullshit you're willing to deal with when the person's a good hump. And Roscoe and Reacher look at each other. It's like, yeah, awkward time to hear that comment after your little sexcapade you had last night. But yeah, it turns out that's what he was doing. Her husband was, she thought he was pocketing like these, because he's supposed to be delivering like, what was it, AC units or something like that he was delivering, but he was most likely like, oh, like skimming off the top, and he was. And I wonder, is that what got him killed, or was he just a loose end? It probably was most likely like they found out he was skimming off the top, and that probably blew back on him. That's the problem. You never want to skim off the top when you're in the middle of a criminal activity. You get paid what they pay you. If you think like, oh, I'll sneak a little off the top, it's like, yeah, that's going to always bite you in the ass. So, I mean, first and foremost, you never want to get in the middle of a criminal organization or business regardless. But if you are involved, just don't skim off the top. You think like, oh, it's a little bit, no one's going to miss anything. It's like, they're very meticulous about their money, and even a penny out of place is like, yeah, that's a problem. Seen too many TV shows and movies revolving around that very notion that, yeah, you just don't want to cross that particular line or bridge. So, but basically, he would take these extra boxes and come back, go to, what was it, Miami or like Florida or something, come back, because I forgot what it was. The counterfeiting situation has kind of died down, or at least is manageable to some extent here in the U.S. because of Joe, but the South American side of things is where this comes into place. Whoever's behind all this is coming from that side of things. They're the ones who hired the muscle that came after Reacher that ended up getting God. So, when that was all said and done, that's where the truck driver comes into place. He packages up the counterfeit money and he brings it back to Mulgraves to be kind of like the main distribution center. they ended up getting an address from Picard about where Joe was staying, because they ended up finding out one of his identity, which I love that ended up being this whole conversation about pseudonyms. Her pseudonyms and Roscoe's pseudonyms are based on writers. Reacher's are forgotten ex-presidents and was a baseball player, because I know his brothers was like Yankee catchers, ends up being his pseudonyms. So they ended up tracking him down. Someone had already gotten there ahead of time, took what they thought was all his files, but most likely Jack's like, my brother would have hidden the real important stuff somewhere else because he knew someone would find it. So right, they look at like his clothing and stuff, like a bag with some of his personal belongings, and think like, oh, there's not much to it. Found a secret note. Sadly, those guys were waiting, and not only did they get the stuff beforehand, but I guess they looked through the stuff and didn't find what they were looking for, so they knew Roscoe and Reacher were on their way back. So either a combination of, well, let's kill them when they get here, or most likely they might find something we need. Because the moment they noticed that Reacher had a note, they were like, oh, he's got it, let's go after him. And Reacher made a point to show them that he had the note, so they weren't going after Roscoe, which she didn't appreciate, because the whole point is like, right, we're in this together, I'm a cop, I can take care of myself, I don't need you trying to protect me, I don't need your chivalrous bullshit. For him, it's like, okay, clearly you don't, when you were able to kind of back me up and put a bullet in the last dude's head. Clearly you're skilled enough and you got this. But he cares about her, and even admits, a moment of vulnerability of, I never thought, like, Joe was almost the last person in this world I ever cared about, and I thought he would be the last person, and then I met you, and that changed things. You being like, you're still someone in this world I care about. So of course I'm like, I don't mean to overstep those boundaries, but it is a thing of, I was just trying to help out because I don't want you getting hurt. I already lost my brother, don't want to lose another person I'm starting to care about. Now the big question becomes, well, how did these guys first and foremost know exactly where Reacher and Roscoe were going to go? Because it's not like they beat them by a massive margin. They only got there, they were there 20 minutes before they were. So they only found out where to go because Reacher and Roscoe did. Because Finley's starting to wonder if it's Stevenson, and even, like I brought it up last episode, the way he's acting about all of this makes me think, his nervous energy makes me think he is one of the three people. I brought it up last episode. I believe he's probably the person that covered the body up with the box. He's the one that has the reservation, and I think maybe Baker's the one that kicked the body, and maybe it was like either KJ or Kleiner himself that ended up pulling the trigger, because like there's the whole, they haven't really fully connected the thread, but last episode Reacher made a point of like, right, looking at their trophies, like of the taxidermy, like heads, the mounts on the walls, being like, oh, marksman shoots shots, and not less those were collected by someone else. But you would assume Kleiner, being who he is, like you'd assume that's just a Kleiner situation. So like I said, that's either him or KJ. But now it kind of begs the question, because Stevenson's the one that answered the phone when Picard called. Picard's called a few times, so it's like, right, he was pretending to be Finley's dad, which even I was like, oh, interesting timing. We had the whole conversation about Horatio a little bit last episode with the Kleiner of it all, so I was like, oh, what are the chances your dad's calling now? Like, did some of that heat from Kleiner find its way to your dad? I mean, we don't even know if his dad's still alive. I should also correct something, since I'm also talking about Finley. I misunderstood that whole conversation last episode between him and the lady from the bank, because I was thinking like, oh, he just suddenly quit, and then I thought he moved to a different bank job. I was like, no, that is his bank job, the one he supposedly had been working for the past year. But it's like he hadn't worked there in like over a year, so he was lying to Charlie about that. So I was like, okay, because my thought was he left after starting that currency thing, and then my thought was, oh, he started working at a new bank and transferred that whole operation over. It's like, no, that was the bank he was working at. So, but the moment he left, they stopped running. So that's when I'm like, that program must have, that currency thing must have been the way they were funneling this counterfeit situation, and ultimately I guess they left it behind just because they didn't want to paper trail, or that would have too many eyes on it, and maybe that operation was getting too big and they no longer needed the bank to be that front. I mean, it was his job for a while legitimately, but maybe maybe he was told to quit it, or maybe he did. There's still unclear elements to that, I'm sure. So, but either way, getting back to the point I was bringing up about Stevenson, now you see that. Because I think last episode, Roscoe kind of bought into his act, and now she's like, was it an act? Was he being sincere? So they don't know whether or not they can really, truly trust Stevenson. It seems more likely that he's the one that ratted on, because, like, who else would... Like, he must have listened in on a call, not unless it was someone else. So, there's that angle. Like, maybe Stevenson's actually innocent. Maybe he's a patsy in all of this. That he has some role in all of this that's currently unclear. But Finley also kind of got chewed out by Teal because Kleiner is the complaining bitch that he is, being like, hey, this guy threatened to stick his foot up my ass and stuff like that, yada yada. So it's like, right, fall in line, do your job, yada yada, so on and so forth. You don't make a move without my say so. Keep the investigation going where you go, because if you screw up, you'll be penalized for it. Hell, you might even lose your career over it. They ended up getting the note from Joe's that he had left that Reacher had. And so they started calling these numbers. One ended up being, what was it? The Environment Protection Agency, I believe, was the one Reacher called. But the other two were like economics professors that were all both on this particular trip at the same time and would come. It was a conference they both went to, and they were both going to be back in 3 days. So it's like, what is that about? At least the economic side of things, you'd assume that have something maybe to do with counterfeiting. But then it's like, well, where the hell does the environmental protection agency, like, where do they fall into play in that? As Roscoe asked, like, what does that have to do with counterfeiting? Because it's like, why did my brother have Hubble's number in his shoe? And also he keeps going back to the feed, which Roscoe tells him to let it go, but it's like, no, that's a lot of animal feed, and especially considering like agriculture doesn't seem to be anything that Kleiner's mixed up in. So maybe it's a thing of, maybe that's not actual animal feed, maybe it's kind of a front, just like the boxes were a front to do the whole bringing in the counterfeit money with no one batting an eye. Maybe the same thing of like, there's something else in that feed. Maybe this does have to deal with drugs or something. That's where I'm like, I don't know. There's so many pieces to this puzzle, we don't fully know how they all click yet. But Reacher ends up calling in a PI. Was it Neagley? Who I was looking at the actress on IMDb. Her name's is it Marie Stan or is it Maria Stan? I saw that she was in Swamp Thing. I was like, who is she in Swamp Thing? And I looked at, like, there was like one picture of her like on from Swamp Thing and on the IMDb, like, you know, the X-ray thing, and I was like, it's been a couple years since I've seen that, but I'm like, if I remember correctly, she played, and wasn't Crystal Reed's character's name Abby in Swamp Thing? I believe so. I believe she was Abby's best friend, if I'm not mistaken, if that's who she is. Which, once again, bringing up the DC connection through and through of like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Especially considering that character has ties to Reacher specifically. So, which is really sweet when she was like, oh, like, you know, she found out about Joe. I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. It's like, how are you? He's like, well, Joe's the one that's dead, not me. And she's like, yeah, for a second I forgot who I was talking to. She's like, well, yeah, you need someone to talk to. He's like, we did talk. And she's like, all right, dude, stop disassembling. Like, you jerk, you know. I'm trying to have this emotional moment with you, and you're just kind of shooting me down. I even love Ross being like, does she always talk to you that way? He's like, no, sometimes she speaks her mind. So I guess that was her being very PG about it. I guess sometimes she gets really, like, goes for the jugular when it comes to Reacher. There was a part of my brain just crossed my mind. I'm like, you don't think Dave ever, like, hooked up? I mean, she might just be like a friend in general, but I almost wondered, have they ever had that type of relationship? It crossed my mind, but I was like, most likely not. But I'm still keeping that somewhere in the back of my mind of whether or not that's a potential thing for them. They end up try to meet up with Molly, which I also love on the ride there. You have Finley listening to 38 Pistols. He's like, I know you're into jazz, but this has got to make you feel something, right, Reacher? And he was like, no. And so Finley turned it off. I was like, I love how petty you guys are. And even Reacher's like, okay, I see how it is. But they end up seeing Molly Beth, and she ends up recognizing Jack just because he looks so much like his brother. So ultimately, the sad situation is that by the time they're trying to meet up with her, she ends up getting out. It's like, once again, the bad guys continue to be a step ahead somehow. And I don't know if it might have, I don't know if that was a gunshot wound. It was mostly, I mean, silencers could be involved, so that's why we probably didn't hear anything. Or they could have just stabbed her. But whatever was in those files she was bringing them, it's gone now, and she died in Reacher's arms. And just the last thing she says, because she was like, her eyes were like, she was slipping out in and out of, and obviously she called him Joe at the end. It's kind of sad. I mean, I think it's a good thing Roach, I don't know why I said Roach, Roscoe told him to talk to her earlier a little bit about her. He would have never had that moment at all. That moment would have been taken from him. But it's like, it sucks. Just like, once again, people around him is dying. Like, this is someone that he could have had more conversations with, someone who got to know his brother. Obviously, someone that cared about his brother is now gone. And it's like, damn, that sucks. I was just kind of a little nervous when she was at the train station. I was like, oh, feels like something's going to happen to her. Didn't want it to, obviously, but that really sucks. Especially when we got that little flashback last episode. Is Stan, I mean not last episode, this episode. Is Stan supposed to be their dad, or is that like their uncle or something? Because if you look at their mom's name, their mom's name is Josephine Reacher. But if you look at IMDb, Stan is just Stan. So that's why I'm like, I don't know if that's like a stepdad situation, their actual like dad, or if that's an uncle thing. Because I'm like, if that was their actual dad, wouldn't his name be like Stan Reacher? But maybe I'm reading too much and I just felt stupid about it. But because of everything that went down, supposedly because of Joe, but we all know it's because of Jack, that the whole baseball situation, Curtis, and now Stan has got to suffer the ramifications career-wise because that dude's dad's like was he like a brigadier or something like that? So now he's going to suffer the ramification. It's like, that guy's vindictive. He's going to make you pay. And obviously Joe tries to say, like, I'm sorry, I didn't know, like, is what happening to you for real? He's like, I didn't know that was going to happen. He's like, well, yeah, that's what you get for, because he was just trying to stick up. They all recognize he was trying to stick up for Billy, but it's still the notion of, you got to recognize the ramifications of your actions. And Jack wants to tell the truth, but his brother stops him because he's like, hey, you're 12 years old. So I was like, okay. Because I thought Jack was a little older than what it was. I figured he'd still be a minor. So is Joe, because like they're only 2 years apart, so Joe's got to be 14, so he's not going to suffer any, like, I thought like maybe it's because I thought, hey, Jack might be 16 and Joe might be like 18, so he could suffer heavier ramifications. But Joe's just like, right, your instinct was to keep your mouth shut, and that's good. He's like, you don't need to just don't do this, like, let me handle it. Because I think for him, it's, I'm the big bro, I've got to be the one. I guess for him, it's like, I could have stopped you at the time, but I didn't. Well, like I said, they're not clarifying, but the fact is, Jack wanted to, the look on his face last episode and this episode tells it all. Like, it was pretty clear, like, he's the one that did it. I'm sure, we don't know if Joe's kind of got that anger in him, that beast in him, like Jack does. I'd said it previously, I wondered if that situation was what led to the beginning of the end of their relationship, of like, maybe after that they kind of started drifting apart more and more over the years after that. But we still don't have the full context for the aftermath of that situation. So we'll ultimately have to wait to see where all that goes. Where, in fact, all of this takes us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.